computer under my code number there, they can get this whole thing to be available on the screen, and then they can bring up person after person. If they bring up their Uncle George, can I use Montgomery again? George Montgomery, and they bring him up, and then they can go to his brothers, his sisters, and get them up too, or go back a generation and get his mother's side, which would be a different name also. So you couldn't go to the library or to any place at all and get that type of work in any short length of time at all. Even if there is a place like a church book or a school book, all the variables that are there are minimal. A school book would only be a picture and maybe an address and a grade of graduating, and the church yearbooks. Church directories are pretty good. They oftentimes show the whole picture of the whole family with 3 children, one on the lap of the mother and the 2 standing there, and the daddy standing there. So that's pretty interesting and more advanced than these other one-shot deals that I get. A church book will give you that, the 4 names of the children or whatever, and the address. And but it won't give you an age, but it'll give you those features. So each one of these avenues of research has its personal benefit, and sometimes they're missing some other thing that another medium research would give you. So throwing all that together in a composite comes out with a pretty good result, except each of them still only come up individually, like the church book and city directory or the person or the marriage. They would be 3 or 4 or 5 entries, but yet they would all be under the same name. So pressing your computer 3 or 4 times, you've got that whole thing, and really could be in less than a minute as you become adept at getting the right thing up on the screen. So it saves a vast amount of time because you can't already go anywhere and find it of a person. Now, wedding write-ups that you see in the paper were very big in the 1930s and 40s. Sometimes they'd have the front page of the social section of the Sunday paper with one girl with all her flaming white dress way out there like that. She took up half of the front page of the Sunday paper social section, and there were others through that section of the paper that took big write-ups. But if that would be true, I didn't pull those. It would not fit my study, but I would get them under a 3, 4, 5, or 6 liner who was Mary Smith, married to George Montgomery, who lived here, lived there at the Episcopal Church, and then they don't give family studies. They just said the best man at this wedding was Harry Jones. Well, 20 years later, Harry Jones has long just buried that family. In fact, the 2 guys don't run together anymore. So those are strange things to put together. The best lady at a wedding, the bridesmaid at a wedding, she played a prominent role on that day, but as this couple gets married and goes to their world, she moves or gets married or drifts out of this person's life. So those features don't stand up too strong. But a wedding, the license of a wedding says George Montgomery, age 43, of Washington Avenue, marries Mary Jones, age 41, of Lincoln Avenue. So there's 4 or 5 facts there, strong for a lifetime, if no divorce sneaks in there, for a lifetime, that couple.
The study of genealogy, the main home of genealogy in the United States is the Latter-day Saints in Utah. Mm-hmm. The main hall in Indiana is the Allen County Library in Fort Wayne. The computer hits that we've investigated in the last year shows that the Browning genealogy gets even more hits than the Allen County Library in Fort Wayne. But it's, can you discuss a little bit the prominence of genealogy, Mother, and how it's influenced the southern Indiana area compared to all of Indiana and even the Latter-day Saints genealogy study?
Well, I just think it has become more and more popular in recent years. But even in past years, genealogy was important to many people. They didn't necessarily look upon it that way, but they were very firm to count their cousins and their aunts, and families were vitally important. And in New York, for instance, in the East, I think it's more important there than it is some other parts of the country. And the South, my goodness, a family is everything. Socially, it is important because they want to know your background and who were your ancestors. And if you live in New York, if you want to be one of the famous 400, you'd better have your genealogy. And it better go back to George Washington. And that same thing is true of the South. You were counted you were looked upon with more prestige if you had your family history. And they knew that, yes, she was descended from Benjamin Franklin. And people boasted about it.
Well, you're looking at my longtime collective of obituaries out of the Evansville newspaper. In my earlier days of my career in doing this collective, I cut and paste, and you will see these pages on the floor right here. They've been cut and pasted chronologically through the years. But after a long number of years of that collective, I switched to just collecting and assembling the one page of a newspaper that had the title of obituaries on it. So a big part of my collection is the entire page of the paper. But all of it I ran through the typewriter system. All of them were typed and collected and kept. But even though all the data that could be, most of the data had some abbreviations to it, were put onto the 3-by card system. And so all that you see is registered that way. And it gives you a backup entry by the date. I put the date on every card that showed the date of death of a man, but that would be the next day's paper, so it would be off one day by the date of death, or maybe two. But it was a valuable stepping stone to research. And then, after long years of cutting and pasting, I quit that and just kept the whole page, so I would still have that assembly in my collection, so that you could go back to that. But you can just as readily go back to the microfilm that I showed you in the other room where things were taken. The picture is where I got my later years of picture from that. But I'm using the phrase later years. The later years that I got were earlier years because I went to the library in the 1980s and 90s and photographed the years of the 40s, the 30s, the 20s, and the 10s. So I'm talking about years ago, but I did the work in more current years. So in order to get you a little more mixed up, I have to throw that in there also, that it is a double indentry to go both ways. So today, and I've lost track of this idea entirely, I just go straight to the computer since 1990. So it's another method of collective. Even though it's all now on the computer, it has different systems of getting on there. The computer nowadays, just my secretary just sits at a desk, takes the morning paper, and transfers that straight into the computer. And the beauty of the computer is, of course, you could find a person who had died under their daughter's name, which would be a married name, or under other commitments and other collectives that I have assembled onto that card system.
Why are they here at the library?
The method, the library now has an idea of taking those and sending them to a gentleman named Dr. Van Aken in Michigan, at a university up there in Albany, Michigan. And the plan is to put on the bottom of my card system, which tells who it is and what they are, whatever is there related to it. So each of these write-ups that appeared in the paper had to be abbreviated to fit my system. So sometimes they might have been a member of the Order of the Moose or the Owls, and I might not have gotten those little vignettes in there about what they did and where they had gone through the world. All kinds of things have to be abbreviated in many of these because they have a greater write-up than my card system will stand.
How many years of obituaries are here?
Well, I won't have all of them here because I switched to a computer in the 1990 and would force some of my collection not to be here, even though I have all the collectives that I could amass together from the early 1900s, like 1906, up till now. Even though the main thrust of looking these things up is on the computer, the way that I have put them together still remains that I have in collective the original Start the newspaper.
What is the advantage of the original newspaper article, which is what is in front of you, over your 3x5 cards?
I have the advantage if you're going to look up somebody because mine will be collected in an alphabetical manner. The newspaper is collected in a chronological manner, but the newspaper would have a greater resource of information than mine would. So both have their advantages. My system is easy, accessible. The newspaper system is more profound in what they have put together. There is a century of collection, but they may not all to be here, but they are in my collective. This is just an abbreviated stack here so you could see it on this film. But I do have a collection that goes back to 1906. But the reasons it's not all here, a lot of that is a photostated part of the newspaper that I desired to collect. Not the entire paper. This collection is not the entire paper. I honed in on just obituaries. So that's what you will see. I have, from the early 1900s, a collection of obituaries. And there are a number of years, the early years of that, was taken by a photography method. So I just have that isolated part of the paper, much like you see here, but that's collected on 8x5s.
Mrs. Browning, how did your father like his collection of newspapers?
Well, he didn't like it. He couldn't understand it. They were stacked and stacked, and he would say, "What's he doing with those newspapers?" Well, you know, I don't think I knew what he was doing with them. Sometimes I wonder if he knew what he was doing with them. But no, he didn't care for that. He didn't like clutter. And Charlie can live with clutter, so.
These newspapers collected for many years, did you worry about a fire hazard at any time?
Well, he did. I did too, because there were so many. My goodness, it was just ripe for a fire. Well, I'm just shocked to see 50 years of newspapers and know that we have 50 years of newspapers in another place. I just don't think anybody has 100 years of newspapers. If they have, I haven't met them. But it's a phenomenon. It definitely is. Now, you understand they're not full newspapers, they're just obituaries, but even at that, it's shocking to me.
How do you think the original newspaper obituary is going to help historians in the future?
Oh, it will, it gives all the information that historians could want. Our genealogists, you know, people forget so quickly. They can't remember what was in a newspaper, even yesterday sometimes. So it's a wealth of information.
The newspapers, your husband used newspapers as a source for all his card collecting. If somebody threw a newspaper away at the house, or if somebody destroyed a newspaper, would he be upset about that?
Oh, that was trouble immediately. If someone took a newspaper or destroyed one, that was immediate trouble. Now, you could take his money, and you could take almost anything he had, but you couldn't take a newspaper. That was vital. That was the most important thing he owned, the newspaper.
Mrs. Browning, did everyone immediately recognize the value of his work early on?
Oh, no. They didn't recognize it at all. They were mystified by it, and they kept wondering, what is he doing? And he didn't explain much, and so they just would, scratch their head and